I've already done a whole video on the importance of piracy to the end user, and unsurprisingly, there's a ton of comments talking about how piracy is bad for the creators that have their work pirated, and obviously my knee-jerk reaction is, yeah, that would suck, I get it. But oddly enough, there's good evidence that piracy can actually be beneficial to the creators that have their stuff pirated. So, say it with me now, fuck corporation. Very good, gold star. However, there is an obvious difference between pirating a game from one of the biggest companies in the world and pirating one from a smaller team. Say, the guys that made Hotline Miami 2. And when I say guys, I mean guys. Denton Games lists just 5 people in the credits of Hotline Miami 2. And I did touch on this story in the previous video, but quick recap. The game was refused classification in Australia for sexual violence, which means that they can't sell it here at all, digitally or physically. So an Australian fan emails the lead designer saying, hey, how do I get a legitimate copy of the game? And the designer says, hey, just pirate it, which was later backed by their publisher, Devolver Digital. So, did this make Hotline Miami 2 a flop because gamers were given the green light to take it for free? Even though Soderstrom obviously meant specifically for Australian gamers to pirate it, gamers worldwide would jump on this opportunity, right? Well, no, the game sold incredibly well. While we didn't get sales numbers from Devolver, the game did peak at 19,000 concurrent players on Steam and racked up 58,000 reviews. If you assume just 1% of players reviewed the game, that's like 6 million copies sold through Steam alone. Consider that they also sold it on console and then re-released the game in a bundle in 2019, so they made their bank. If anything, the situation brought additional attention to the game. The uproar around the ban in Australia was a hot topic leading up to release, and then Soderstrom's reply to that fan also made headlines just about everywhere. All those extra eyes meant more attention on a game you might have never even considered buying. And it also boosted the reputation of Devolver Digital as a pro-consumer publisher. Now, this isn't a one-to-one comparison, but Northern Lion shared this interesting observation about Papers, Please at a GDC talk discussing how gaming content impacts sales of those games. He noted that every time the game was played by a creator with a substantial audience, the Steam charts saw a pretty measurable spike in sales. It's not unreasonable to say that all this coverage of Hotline Miami 2 would have followed the same logic. On the note of Australia banning things, we're set to have a social media ban just like the UK, ID verification for everything, privacy nightmare. That's a whole video of its own, but I just wanted to say that if you need a VPN, I personally recommend Proton. I've been using their services for years before they even sponsored the channel, but now that it's looking like that sort of privacy tool is going to be very important and very necessary for a lot of people, I do genuinely recommend getting a VPN of any description. And personally, I've been very happy with Proton, and that's why I'll recommend it. If you are in the same boat as me, if you're in the UK, the US, wherever else they're gonna start doing this bullshit, you can use my link down below to get 50% off a 2-year subscription. Anyway, back to piracy stuff. Hotline Miami 2 isn't the only game to have benefited from a pro-piracy stance. This indie developer reported a massive increase in sales after hosting his game on the Pirate Bay for anyone to download. ShotX made the game Danger Gazers, a roguelite top-down shooter, and it costs just 10 Yankee Doodles on Steam. But it's also available entirely for free on Pirate Bay, uploaded by the developer himself. The torrent was posted with the description, "This is the latest DRM-free version of Danger Gazers. There's no catch here, no Steam-only features, just the fully functional game." He also went and shared the torrent in a piracy subreddit, saying that there are people who can't afford the game. Some want to play the game before buying, some that never buy games. Just trying to help all of those people out. A ton of users praise his pro-piracy attitude, but that alone isn't enough, right? If your game sucks, nobody's gonna care that they can get it for free. So I went and torrented it from the developer himself, thought it was pretty damn good, and then went and bought it on Steam because it's $10. And based on ShotX's own claims, I'm not the only person that followed that train of thought. But let's broaden our scope to more than just video games, because the benefits of piracy also extend to books. Yes, people do pirate books. I did. As a Tumblr teenager, I was constantly exposed to the fandom around the work of young adult writer John Green, who is famous or infamous, depending on who you are, for The Fault in Our Stars, as well as being a brother of a vlogging nature.
The 3 most viewed videos on the Vlogbrothers channel feature, in order, giraffe sex, and giraffe sex.
So 13, 14-year-old me downloaded ebook versions of all of his works, slapped them on my iPod Touch, read through them, and absolutely adored them, particularly Looking for Alaska and Paper Towns, and the Christmas one, I can't remember the name. I was so compelled by his writing that I did in fact go and buy multiple of his books. Though I've got no clue where they are now. This is like over a decade ago and I've moved halfway across the world since then, so just believe me, I swear I did. And I'm not saying that buying his books after pirating them makes it okay, but there is a non-zero chance that I would have never ended up reading his work otherwise. Green himself has not taken a pro-piracy stance. In fact, he's publicly spoken against piracy. But there is another author that has. Before I continue, I do want to provide a content warning, big flashing lights and stuff, because some pretty nasty stuff has come out about Neil Gaiman, and we're not going to be talking about that because that's not what my channel is about. But if discussing his work is not your cup of tea, you can skip to the time code over here, and I'll see you in a minute. Most authors are pretty vocally anti-piracy. Unlike a big studio, there's a much more direct impact on their personal bottom line because it's usually them, their editor, and their publisher. And Gaiman was not an outlier initially. If you're not familiar with his name, you'll almost definitely know some of his work. The Sandman, Coraline, Good Omens. In an interview with Open Rights Group in 2011, he discusses his concerns about piracy of his work in the early days of the internet. At the time, he was under the impression, like many authors, that if a pirated copy of your book was hosted online and you didn't take action, you were essentially forfeiting your ownership of the copyright. An idea that he now knows to be untrue, and it's not really an argument people make against piracy nowadays, because we know that's not how copyright works. But his other concern, the fact that it felt like piracy was undermining his sales, is still a very common sentiment. However, with a bit of deeper digging, Gaiman noticed some patterns that helped reshape his view on piracy. One of the first trends he noticed was that sales were increasing in regions that were pirating his work most often. He cites Russia as an example, where fans were distributing unofficial translated versions of his books online. When his official translated works were then released in Russia, sales continued to rise. So he infers that these fan translations of his books were exposing new eyes to his work, and decided to put that idea to the test. He convinced his publisher to share a copy of American Gods entirely for free on their website, even though the book was still flying off shelves at this point. Free to view, free to download, free to keep. And, well, I'll let him tell you what happened.
What happened was sales of my books through independent bookstores, because that was all we were measuring it through, went up the following month 300%. And I started to realize that actually you're not losing books, you're not losing sales by having stuff out there.
In the end, Gaiman found that piracy boosted the reach of his work, saying that he believes pirated copies of his books are an essential part of advertising his writing, and that they're also an essential part of the beauty of the internet. The World Wide Web's ability to spread ideas faster than ever before, to allow people to experience things that they may have never been able to experience otherwise. And it's not just Gaiman's personal belief. A 2017 study conducted by the European Commission. A 2017 study conducted by the European Commission found that piracy has a very questionable negative impact on most industries. For books specifically, the report says that the number of illegal streams is negligible, meaning that there are so few examples of pirated works in this study that the impact on sales is not really measurable. But for music, they found that the decreased physical sales of CDs, which was measurable, was also almost entirely offset by higher ticket and merchandise sales, implying that Gaiman's theory about piracy as a form of advertising probably has a degree of merit. This is also why touring and merchandise is such a big part of music culture these days compared to buying CDs and vinyls, because streaming makes people fuck all money. And when we look at video games, there's some really fascinating numbers, because this is where the study actually finds a positive correlation between piracy and sales. And it is not the first or the last study to report that. In this case, 55% of users reported being willing to pay full price for the last game that they pirated. Add in Steam sales and the like, and that number obviously will jump up. And the part that was most surprising to me, 66% of book pirators reported that they would happily buy the last book that they had pirated, even though books can be stupid expensive at times. Now for cinema, we got two bits of data. We've got illegal streams of the top 100 movies when it comes to a first watch, and then when it comes to a repeat viewing. When it came to users watching a blockbuster like Jurassic World for the first time, the number comes out to about 0.8 illegal viewings per year. Let's do some quick math. There were 1.24 billion tickets sold in the US through 2017, and with a population of 325 million, we get about 3.5 ticket purchases per person that year. So 3.5 tickets and 0.8 illegal viewings comes out to about 1 in 4 sales being displaced by piracy, which is not an insignificant number, if that was the right number. See, the study also queried users on if they actually would have paid to see the movie if piracy wasn't an option. And based on those responses, only 40% of those illegal viewings would have actually been a sale if the user was able to legally watch it. Otherwise, they would have skipped it entirely. So the displacement number would actually be closer to about 1 in 8 or 1 in 9. But when we look at repeat viewings, the number of displaced sales is higher, about 1 in 5, which is not surprising. If someone wasn't going to pay for it the first time, it's even less likely they would pay for a second or third. And like I said, these are not insignificant numbers. But when you look at the list of top 100 movies, was Jurassic World gonna feel a 12% difference in the $1.7 billion they already made? No. All in all, I think it's fair to say that the impact of piracy on sales is pretty overblown. And obviously it's not just as simple as straight numbers. The effect that piracy has on smaller creators, like a smaller game development studio, is not the same as how it would hurt EA or Rockstar. But as a tool to reach wider audiences, piracy is really the embodiment of the spirit of the internet, the ability to access more information than we ever could before. And I think that's a good thing. Thanks for watching, and extra thanks to all these super cool names over here. If you want to join them, then you can head over to Patreon, and for your support, I give you some fun bonus content every now and then. If you haven't watched my first video on piracy, you can go check that out over there, or you can check out this one that YouTube thinks that you'll like. Peace.